the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and we are joined now by Tyler Horka of On3's Blue and Gold. He covers Notre Dame. Tyler, we got to talk about a lot of things because we've been doing these deep dive segments into the team's schedules when the win totals come out. So FanDuel put out Notre Dame's win total at 9.5. We got to talk about that. But I want to talk more about Notre Dame, the playoff, and relevance because you got it from every direction last week, including Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah, I mean, in February, that's exactly what you want. Like, I was like, thank God Stephen A. Smith is talking about Notre Dame football. Obviously, in March, that's going to be a separate story because we're going to be covering football practices. We're going to see Riley Leonard on the field in the Notre Dame uniform for the first time. So in March, we're going to have actual stuff to cover. But when Stephen A. Smith started talking about Notre Dame football and relevance, I was like, thank God it's February. This is exactly what we need. And like we were talking about off air, it gave me a little material to write a column as well. So we'll talk about that, obviously. But you just spent all that time talking to Mike Elko, and I thought it was a really good conversation. And that's kind of where everyone's head's at. Like the Stephen A. Smith thing, that was a blip. It lasted for about 3 or 4 days. But really, Andy, this entire offseason, these Notre Dame fans are thinking about Texas A&M because when you look at the schedule, and we're about to do that right now, it's that game, and then you look at all these other games, and you're saying, holy cow, we could go into our first bye week undefeated. We might still be undefeated when Florida State rolls in the first week of November, or the second week of November, but Notre Dame has a bye in the first week. So, Andy, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at all these games, and I'm thinking if you can just get by Mike Elko and Texas A&M at College Station in week 1, who else is going to trip you up before you get to Florida State?
Yeah, well, I got a few ideas. And so that 9.5 win total, like, and I always feel this way when we look at a team schedule. I'll throw Florida's out there this year because that's the one everybody's saying is the hardest. We're like, that's going to be the most difficult schedule. There will be 2 teams on that schedule who we think are going to be good who stink, and it won't end up being. And the same thing in the opposite direction is going to happen for Notre Dame. I think there are going to be a couple teams on the schedule that you're like, wait a second. These guys are better than we thought. I'll tell you which ones I think they are. Louisville, who beat them last year, I think is going to be better this year than they were last year. So Louisville, I do think Jeff Brom has a plan. They were excellent in the transfer portal. The other one, October 19th, Georgia Tech. They play at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's going to be a half Notre Dame crowd still, but I think Brent Key's done a great job at Georgia Tech. They're going to be a lot tougher than people realize.
Yeah, I remember covering football games here in South Bend, and I would get home, and we have a magazine to put out at Blue and Gold Illustrated the day after every single game, and I would be sitting in this exact same chair, put the TV on, just kind of float through the other games, and I'd be surprised pleasantly at what Brent Key was doing with that Georgia Tech team. It seemed like every week I'd get on there and say, how is Georgia Tech hanging with this team, or how is Georgia Tech beating that team? So that one does scare me a little bit. The Louisville one scares you for all the reasons that you just mentioned, Andy. It's a good football team. Jeff Brom is a good football coach. They did well in the portal, like you said. So that one should scare Notre Dame fans, but I think Notre Dame's going to come into that one with a little extra themselves because of what happened in Louisville last year. You can make a case that was probably Notre Dame's most embarrassing outing of the season. I know the 10 dudes at Ohio or against Ohio State here in South Bend, that was embarrassing for other reasons, but it was a no-show at Louisville, and Sam Hartman threw 3 picks, and that game was over early in the third quarter. So, and then I want to kind of piggyback on something else you said. I totally agree with the someone's going to surprise you narrative, and then someone's going to be surprisingly bad. Like last year for Notre Dame, that was USC. Like Caleb Williams, I still think was one of the 3 best. I mean, top 5. Obviously, he's a Heisman Trophy winner quarterback in college football, and Notre Dame just ran over those guys here in South Bend. And I think you're looking at USC and you're thinking, okay, that's no longer what like we went into last season thinking Ohio State, Clemson, USC. If Notre Dame can go 2-1 in those games and win everything else, they're a college football playoff game. Well, it turns out they do go 2-1, or no, they go 1-2 in those games, mind you, and then the other thing was, like you said, Andy, someone's going to trip you up somewhere along the way, and that ended up being Louisville. And then you look at Clemson last year as well. the way their season was going, if you were a Notre Dame fan, you were thinking, okay, we're going to go
You're
into
feeling
Clemson,
great about that game going in. Yeah.
You're going to beat these Tigers. And then that ended up being one of those games that you surprisingly lost as well. So getting back to the whole crux of this conversation, I think 9.5 is the perfect number because they won 9 games last year. If you keep going, like Marcus Freeman was 8-4 year 1, 9-3 year 2. If you think it's going to be 10-2 in year 3, but it could also be 9-3 again, 9.5. That's the number.
You know what else is easy? Prize Picks, the best daily fantasy platform in the universe. You're playing against a number. You're not playing against a bunch of sharks or a bunch of your idiot friends in your fantasy league, although that you might want to play against them. But download the Prize Picks app, use the referral code Andy. They will match your first deposit up to $100, and you can play college basketball, NBA, soccer, darts, you name it. So like college basketball, you got big Monday tonight, and you're basically deciding Raekwon Battle at West Virginia. He's playing against Kansas State. The number on him is 14.5 points. Do you think he will score more points or less points than 14.5? That's one square. You pick at least 2. You can go to 5 squares. The more squares you choose, the bigger the payout, but also the tougher it is. So if you're supremely confident about 2 squares, you go with those 2 squares. If you really want to just let it ride, maybe you go to 5. That is how you prize pick. Well, and really it becomes a question of, is Notre Dame going to make the playoff or not? Because 10-2, I think, gets you in this system. And I don't know how much you laughed last week. I was very tickled by people discovering for the first time that Notre Dame could only be the 5 seed in this playoff system. Like, where have you been for 3 years? This is not a secret, but it is. I mean, this is the ideal situation for Notre Dame, I think, because it allows them to keep their independence. If they go 10-2, they're in. Now, we don't know how long it's going to last after the next 2 years, but it does feel like if they can win 10 games this year, Tyler, they're in the playoff. Yeah,
and 10-2 is going to be weird because it's either going to be you're 10-2 and you tripped up somewhere that you shouldn't, or you're going to be 10-2 and you lost to Texas A&M and you lost to Florida State. And I think there's going to be conversations about Notre Dame at that point. It's going to be, okay, they're 10-2, but who'd they beat? Because if they go 10-2 and they lose to Texas A&M and they lose to Florida State, then you beat Louisville, who's probably going to be ranked at the time. We talked about Georgia Tech could be a decent win, but those might be your 2 best wins if you lose to both Texas A&M and Florida State. So I think you've got to win at least one of those games. Obviously, if you're Notre Dame, you win both, then I think you're in because you have really good. You have 2 really good wins at that point, and you probably don't trip. If you beat both of those teams, Andy, you probably don't trip up twice elsewhere. If Notre Dame beats Texas A&M and beats Florida State, I think we're talking about an 11-1 Notre Dame team. And then at that point, Andy, we're talking about exactly what Notre Dame wants because Jack Swarbrick was in the room when this college football playoff was designed. If Notre Dame's 11-1, you could be talking about the number 5 seed or the number 6 seed and being one of those 2 best teams that hosts a playoff game in the first round. And that is what, getting back to what you were saying a minute ago, people don't understand and realize Notre Dame wanted this because they want to play a home game in December as obviously a higher seed compared to who they'll be playing. If they're a 5 seed, they're going to be playing the 12 seed. You should win that game, especially at that stadium that you're showing on the video right now. So that's kind of the best case scenario for me for Notre Dame this year. I don't think they're a 12-0 team. Marcus Freeman's not there yet as a head coach. But if you go 11-1, you're talking about hosting a home playoff game in December. And that's why Jack Swarbrick was in that room and said, we'll give up our bye if it means that we can play at home in December as a 5, 6, 7 seed, something like that.
Well, and it's a fair trade because they don't have to play a conference championship game. And so the teams that will be in the top 4 will have had to win a conference championship game. So it makes sense.
There's this narrative that Notre Dame has to play an extra game. It's like, no, actually Notre Dame has not been playing an extra game for as long as they've been in college football outside of that 2020 season when they had to play in the ACC. So that's the trade-off is, okay, if you're Alabama or Georgia or someone who's going to win the SEC and you don't have to play that first round game, you still had to presumably win the SEC championship to get to that point. Notre Dame is sitting at home watching those games on their couch that weekend. So that's the trade-off right there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this team. Riley Leonard comes in at quarterback. Mike Denbrock, the new offensive coordinator, he was the offensive coordinator for LSU. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy. Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, awesome at receiver. Can Notre Dame, capture some of that magic? My question for you, Tyler, because I think we know Riley Leonard's good. I think we know Mike Denbrock is a good play caller. But who's he throwing to? Who's Riley Leonard throwing to?
Hodgepodge group of guys. I mean, they just got 3 from the transfer portal. Bo Collins of Clemson being one of those. He's actually the one that's not on campus. Jaden Harrison of Marshall and Chris Mitchell of Florida International. Both of those guys are on campus, and they will be at spring practice, like I was talking about a little bit earlier, next month. So that's when we kind of figure out the pecking order and the hierarchy of all this, I think, is when we see these guys on the field for the first time next year. But you've got those 3 transfers. You've got 3, I believe it is, true freshmen coming in. Cam Williams is the big one of those 3. He was borderline 5-star. I think he got dropped down to a 4-star with On3's latest rankings. But, I mean, he's a dude. He's a guy that can contribute right away. So I think he's in the mix. And then you have that interesting group of returners like the Jaden Greathouses of the world. Jordan Faison came on, and I think I was watching Notre Dame's lacrosse game yesterday, which, by the way, Jordan Faison scored a goal, and he scored a goal in all 3 lacrosse games that he's played in his college career for the defending national champion Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So that is very impressive. But the commentator said that he was talking to Sam Hartman at the Senior Bowl a couple of weeks ago, and Sam Hartman said, yeah, Jordan Faison by the end of the year was our best wide receiver at Notre Dame. So that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing because it's obviously an unforeseen talent that came up, and now you have a guy for the next 3 years. But if a scholarship lacrosse player who was a walk-on for your football program, if Sam Hartman is definitively telling you, hey, he's our best wide receiver, what does that say about the other guys? I'm not sure. It says a lot about Jordan Faison, but I'm not sure what it says about the other guys. So I agree with you, Andy. That's the big question. Will this team have receiving potential? We're going to find out a little bit next month, and then obviously August 31st in College Station. We'll see who Riley Leonard is throwing to then.
Well, as a lacrosse dad who now has to watch a lot of lacrosse pretty much every day of my life, the idea of a great midfielder as a slot receiver, a midi, they call them middies.
Yeah.
It definitely works because that's the guy who has to be he's kind of a point guard on the lacrosse field. And that would be excellent. The agility, the aggressiveness, all that stuff that's required, great for slot receivers, perfect body type, everything. So that I am excited about that. I'm glad Sam Hartman said that because I think that's something Notre Dame has just been missing. Like the tight end has been the focal point of their passing game for what feels like the last 4 or 5 years. If they could just get a couple of guys where maybe you got some guys leading open on the outside, but also somebody who can come from the slot and get open, it changes it all. And I think Riley Leonard changed a lot. You're going through every Riley Leonard start at Duke, which I love, for a series of stories. What have you learned so far about Riley Leonard?
Heck of an athlete. I mean, that's where it starts. And I'm going to do a column at the end of this all, just kind of say, because we've got the individual stories, and you can go to blueandgold.com and find all those. There's one story per start. He started 21 games at Duke. Every single game that we've been through, I think we have 4 left. The broadcast starts with, hey, remember, this guy played basketball in high school, and he wanted to be a scholarship basketball player. I think he had a conversation with Coach K, like, hey, Coach, if you let me walk on, man, I think I can do something. Every single game starts with that. And then you see it. You see why. I mean, the 44-yard touchdown run against Clemson. The game that I just most recently did was Northwestern, who ended up being a pretty good team last year. And he beat Northwestern twice in his career, but he had a 33-yard run last year against Northwestern. This is obviously before the injury stuff started. That was just incredible because he avoids a sack in the backfield. I mean, it's a head-on rusher, free rusher, and he just kind of elusively sidesteps him, gets up to the line of scrimmage, and there's about 3 or 4 guys who could tackle him there, and somehow all of a sudden he's running free, and on the sideline he finishes it with a little stiff arm on the defensive back. So the athleticism is there. As far as the throwing, I think that's where this conversation. It doesn't start there because he is such a good athlete, but it needs to end there because that's what it's going to come down to for him. We talked about the wide receivers, and that's out of his control. But what is in his control is accuracy, making the right reads. I think there's a lot of times in these games that I've been going through them where he just comes off of reads and then takes off and runs. And that's what an athlete will do. He will overly rely on his legs a little bit. But then there are other times where he just throws to the wrong guy and there's an open read. And maybe it's because he doesn't get to that read or he isn't anticipating it. But I think these are things that Mike Denbrock can work on with him, because you mentioned Jaden Daniels a little bit earlier. I remember watching Jaden Daniels at Arizona State, and I never thought, oh, yeah, that guy's going to win the Heisman Trophy someday. So I think there was something that Mike Denbrock said to him, or there's some conversations that were had. And look, Jaden Daniels, all the credit goes to him because he eventually just kind of tapped his potential, and he was like, I am this guy. But I think Riley Leonard could do that too. I think if Mike Denbrock says the right things, Riley Leonard can learn, hey, I am this guy. Like, I'm not just the runner. I can make these throws. So the potential is definitely there. And I mean, he wouldn't be talked about as maybe one of the best NFL prospects in this class if like I think the potential is there if he just kind of taps it like Jaden Daniels did.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.